Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It is Sunday, March the 27th. March is just about out of here. I am, as I do, going to give it a few minutes for people to join. Good morning. All right, I'm going to give it a couple of minutes for people to join. This is Creating Home, a tiny house series, a series that I have been creating content for on YouTube. This is the What's Your Question portion of that series. I alternate Sundays. I provide live content every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, alternating Sundays. So one Sunday it's What's Your Question? And in this series, I'm trying to answer some of the frequently asked questions and answering some of the questions that might be submitted in the chat. And then on the alternating Sunday, it is the conversation series, Conversations on Intimate Spaces, where I have guests who share their tiny house journeys, share their home, how they made the decision to get to tiny. It's less about the aesthetics of the tiny house and more about that person and their journey. Good morning. And so that is the alternating Sunday. So join us Sundays at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for either What's Your Question or the Conversations on Intimate Spaces. And um, we always try to answer some of the questions that are in the chat, but oftentimes in the conversation series, we're just focused on that person's journey, and they usually will end up answering the question that has been entered in the chat about their journey. Good morning. Thank you for joining. So again, this morning is the What's Your Question portion of the conversation series. Good morning. And it is going to be a short session from my perspective, hoping, as I shared earlier in the week on social media, that I have a training that I'm attending this afternoon at 1, so I needed to shorten my session um, this afternoon. Thank you. I always get confused. It is afternoon, isn't it, on my time? Good morning. Good afternoon, depending on where you are this morning. So it is going to be a shorter than usual session. I didn't actually prepare a presentation since it was going to be a shorter session. I encouraged people who had questions, those questions that I always see in the inbox or in the comments in post on social media on YouTube. I encouraged those people to tune in this morning because I was going to try to answer those questions and be more focused on answering those questions, and then um, get back to planning some content in a couple of weeks. So I'm going to answer a few questions that I did see this week that came in on some of my content, and then I'm going to look and see if I have questions in the chat. Um, so one of the questions that is always asked is where I'm located. So I am in North Carolina. I am right outside of Charlotte, about 45 minutes outside of Charlotte, and I am on a friend's farm property. I have shared um, content. Well, let me back up. I didn't even introduce myself. Let me go back because I just jumped into the content. So my name is Jewel Pearson. This is Creating Home, a tiny house series. This is the What's Your Question piece of it. I have lived in my tiny house since 2015. I designed and built it. Started my journey around 2013, designed and built my home 2015. And since that time, I have been sharing my journey with others to hopefully inspire you with my content, inspire people who are interested in tiny houses that they can see my journey. And as I'm sharing these conversations, see others' journeys to inspire them if they're interested in joining the movement or just interested in tiny houses overall. I do offer coaching, consultations, workshops, all of the things to help people along their journey, advance their journey. If you have questions, I'm happy to help you figure out how to get through the movement. It can be a little daunting, but I am here to answer those questions and help you along. It's my intent to create figurative and literal community. It is my desire to actually build a physical tiny house community, and I'm working on those things as we speak. I want those communities to be accessible to the people who don't necessarily see themselves in this tiny house movement. And so that is one of my desires as I'm doing this work. So again, thank you all very much for joining. And so I'm going to go back. So I was answering one of the questions that I saw this week regarding where I am located. I am in North Carolina, right outside of Charlotte, on a friend's farm. Um, Another question that was asked was what was the cost of my tiny house or the cost of tiny houses. I'm not exactly sure what the question was. I have shared that my house cost me about $85,000 out of pocket. And again, that was in 2015 when I was building. Um, I did have sponsors for some of my material, which I've shared also. So out of pocket, it cost me about $85,000. That cost would be in the six figures, in 2022 as lumber and cost and materials and labor, all of those costs have skyrocketed. So I'll share that. Cost for tiny houses is going to vary depending on the size of the house, the amenities, the features, all of that. Oftentimes we've said that if a person builds it themselves, it's usually cheaper than working with a builder. But that's not always the case depending on skill set and the length of time it's going to take the person to build a home. And then even, now as we're factoring in pandemic cost and supply chain issues, all of those things factor in. So I do kind of talk about that in how in episode one of the What's Your Question of how do I get started when I talk about the things that you have to consider as you're interested in building a tiny house. So refer back to that video to answer some of those questions as well. Another question I saw this morning was how do you get to the loft in my tiny house? There are rungs, ladder rungs behind my couch to get to that loft. I use that as a seating loft. I don't access it as much. So I didn't want to dedicate floor space to a ladder or stairs because, again, that was going to be taking away from space that I could use since I don't access that space often. I didn't feel like it was necessary to add that space. Now, if someone add stairs or a ladder within that space. If someone built my plans and decided they wanted to use that loft, absolutely, I would encourage them to include stairs or ladder within the floor space. But if you review some of my um, pictures or even some of the video content, you will see there is a decorative cloth behind my couch and it is hanging on the ladder rung. So to access that space, I kind of step on the couch, access the ladder, and go up to that space. So that's how you access my second loft. Another question I saw this morning, what is the cost to move your home? And that again is going to vary by distance and by the vendor that you use. So I have used I always use professional movers to move my home. And I've only moved within the surrounding area, so it usually costs me around 250 or so to move my house. But again, that's going to vary by distance. I imagine now the costs are going up since we're dealing with gas prices, but that cost is going to vary. But it has been around 250 for me since I'm moving kind of within the area. Another question that was asked of me was, how long do I stay in one location? And for me, it's previously it's been it depends on how long I wanted to stay in the location. And so I kind of talked through all of my locations. So my first location, I was in the RV park. I have shared that I moved out of that RV park because of issues with racism. So I was there. I moved there in May, and I moved out in October because it was a very uncomfortable situation. So I moved out of that area, and I never really intended that to be a long-term spot, but I did have to move because of issues earlier than planned. From that point, I was in someone's backyard, and I was there for a couple of years in again, a suburb of Charlotte, probably about 30 minutes outside, 20, 30 minutes outside of Charlotte. Beautiful location, really loved the property owner, just a very kind gentleman. I had actually connected with him via Craigslist. Was in that location for a couple of years. My desire at that time was to be closer to the city, and I was able to find a location that was within the city limits of Charlotte, actually walking distance from uptown Charlotte. And so I moved my home after being at that location for a couple of years. So I was there in Charlotte, right outside in this within the city limits for about 2.5 years. The city kicked me out from that location after the neighborhood was going through gentrification. So code enforcement, building code enforcement was in and out of the neighborhood. So they realized that there was a structure there. And in going through the conversations with code enforcement and trying to get them to understand tiny houses, we kind of went back and forth for about 6 months or so, and they finally said no. They aren't in the position to understand tiny houses on wheels, so I moved. From there, I moved to a farm property, and my house was there maybe about 6 months. And again, this was the farm prior to this, and again, had some issues with racism in a rural area. My house sat there for a while, and I actually got an apartment because it was a really bad situation. And so from that location, um, I moved my house here to this farm, my friend's farm. I've shared, I don't intend to move from this location. I have added a very large sunroom space that is on foundation. It is not on wheels, so I don't intend to move my house anymore. So this is my forever space. So, how long in my locations? I answered that question. There was another question of what I do with my deck and patio. When I move. And so previously I had the smaller deck and patio, which both were the front deck. I would just load in a U-Haul, and then the patio that I added on, the screened-in porch, as I call it, had to be disassembled. It would also be loaded in the U-Haul, and then once in place, I would reinstall it. All right, so those are the questions that I saw this week that I wanted to answer. A lot of the questions that I see on the content I've answered in some of the series that I've already created in the What's Your Question portion. So I would encourage you to refer back to episode 1, which was How Do I Get Started? Episode 2 of how to get out of your own way. I always see people who are stuck because somebody said it didn't make sense. Somebody doesn't understand tiny houses and they don't know whether to move forward. I kind of talk about that in how to get out of your own way so that you are able to follow your dreams if tiny house living is something that you are interested in, or even, figuring out how to follow your dreams, whether it's tiny houses or something else. I have a video, Dreaming All the Dreams, and it's not just related to tiny houses. Sometimes you have to quiet the external noise and figure out what it is that you want to do. So I encourage you to watch either of those two videos. And then there's always a question about where can I place a tiny house? And so that is episode 3 of the What's Your Question? And I talk about that in depth. And in that conversation, I'm focused on tiny houses on wheels because there is a different process for tiny houses on foundation. So I'm again focused on tiny houses on wheels, but I talk about that. How to find a location, how to have conversations, because the rules are decided they're not decided at the state level, they are decided at the city and county level. So understanding what the rules are in your area having the conversations, the necessary conversations, maybe even deciding that you're not going to have the necessary conversations and what you need to do for finding a location for your house. So where can I place a tiny house is episode 3. So please refer to that if that is a question that you have. And then episode 4 of what your question was, how to figure out your design. So a couple of weeks ago, I talked about figuring out your design and which is a really key piece of your tiny house build and the opportunity for longevity and enjoying your tiny house. And that was one of the big things for me, and which has allowed me to um, May will be 7 years for me in my tiny house. And so my design was it has been key to the success. So refer back to those videos. In the description for this video, I will provide links to all of those videos so you can access them easier. But I've answered those questions. Also, refer back to the conversations on intimate spaces as I shared. There are 5 episodes in that series where others have shared their journey. We had some van dwellers, tiny house people who have talked about their journeys and their challenges and fears and joys and all of those kinds of things that I think you'll find relatable and also help you along your journey. So I'm trying to put together this content so I'm not re-answering the same questions but also providing content for you to find helpful in your journey and to inspire you along the way. Okay, and in the where can I place a tiny house, I'll also talk about the initiative that I have been working on with Black farmers and Black tiny house owners to for partnership for safe spaces and the necessity of that because of the challenges and issues with racism in RV parks in rural areas. So I talk about that as well. So episode 3 is where you can find that information on placing a tiny house. All right. So I am going to look in the chat. That is, I think, all of the content that I had prepared this morning. And so for the next 15 or so minutes, I am going to try to answer questions in the chat. Um, Greetings, Sandra. Thank you for being here. All right. Let's see. Okay, so here's a question, Tweety Bird. All right, Tweety Bird, thank you for joining us this morning. I have a question about where to find builders and land. So I am going to refer you to episode 3, where I talk about places to for a tiny house, how to find builders and land. And also episode 1, where I talk about selecting a builder. So refer to episodes 1 and 3, and then also look in the descriptions for all of those videos because I have shared information about builders that I might recommend. And we've had some of those conversations. So always refer back to those videos and then look in the descriptions for additional information. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Um, LC says, I know this has nothing to do with the topic. This is so funny to me, but I have been wanting to ask you what brand of lipstick do you use? I really like the look. I apologize for getting off topic. That is so funny to me. It is one of the frequently asked questions in my video content. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. I quickly delete the negative because I have no desire for someone else to tell me what I can or should and should not do with my lips. I am going to have to figure out, and perhaps I'll put this in the description just for you, Elsie. The lipstick that I have on right now is something that I found on, I don't have my purse in here, something that I found on Walmart, not Walmart, something that I found on Amazon. So I don't know the name of it, but I'll share it. It is a matte. Some of the other colors that I have been wearing have been from the Lip Bar, which is on, I follow their content on YouTube and I really like their color. So thank you for asking. I appreciate that. And no worries. It is one of the um, I shared on social media how the block feature, block and hide from your channel has become a couple of my favorite features because people often use social media to find their voice that they wouldn't necessarily use in person. And so my bald head and my lipstick seems to be one of those things that people like to discuss. And so sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. And depending on the mood, I might respond, but block and hide from my channel has become one of my favorite things. All right, so thanks for the question. So Latasha says, I'm in the Charlotte area as well and would love to build a tiny house. The land for sale within Charlotte, even a lot, is quite costly. However, I'm apprehensive about moving too far out for nothing. So you'll need to also refer to episode 3 of where can I place a tiny house, because again, it's a different process for a tiny house on wheels versus a tiny house on foundation. Um, and I'm not exactly sure which one you're speaking to. Charlotte does allow tiny houses on foundation. They don't have a minimum size requirement, so you can build a small house on foundation and you just go through their process. Tiny houses on wheels, again, it's something totally different, but refer to episode 3 about placement, and that will help you answer some of those questions that you have. All right, Jewel, are there any taxes you have to pay on your tiny house? So the way a tiny house works is that the trailer that my tiny house is built on is registered. The trailer is a custom tiny house trailer, but you think of it as like a trailer you might see someone using for their lawn equipment business. It's the same type of trailer, and so with that, the trailer is registered through the DMV. It has a tag, and so you then pay taxes through DMV like you would do for a vehicle. One of the things that we've been in conversation with city officials, city and county officials for the last few years, I felt like, and others in the movement feel like, part of the reason that city and county officials aren't um, are won't approve tiny houses, aren't for tiny houses, is because they haven't figured out how to make their money off of it, associated kind of with taxes, et cetera. So one of the things that we've asked is, whatever you would charge in taxes for a house this size on foundation, uh, allow us to pay those taxes, because we'd prefer to pay those taxes to be allowed to have tiny houses on wheels on property. And so that's one of the things that I feel like is one of the reasons that they don't allow tiny houses. And we'd be happy. Most tiny house people I know would be very happy to pay taxes if they just get past not allowing them. So that to answer your question, that is the tax process for tiny houses on wheels. Thank you, Nina. Glam Design and DIYs. Thank you so much. Um, Latasha is asking about a shipping container. I did talk about that. I've forgotten exactly which video I talked about that, but Latasha, I have talked about that. We've kind of been having conversations about right now, with costs being so high for materials, for lumber, whether shipping containers are the way to go. If it might be cheaper to build with a shipping container versus lumber. You'd have to kind of do your cost analysis in your area. Shipping containers, if you just follow some of the container bills, are absolutely durable for long term, can be converted to homes very easily. It's one of the things that are really used in other countries a lot. So it is a viable option. So definitely consider it and do your research. Good morning. Good morning. Let's see. Here's a question. Kamisha is asking, are you connected to a public sewer? Since I will be off grid, are you connected to a public sewer? Since I will be off grid, I have to find a solution to put my gray water. Would you recommend a French water drain? Absolutely. Um, I I have gray water and black water, which is the sewer. Sewer is black water. In conventional homes, the gray water and the black water go into the sewer. For tiny house people, you can do different things with the black water and with the gray water. So the black water has to be managed in a sewer type situation. I have so if you have a flush toilet. So most tiny house people, the majority of tiny house people are going to have a composting toilet where you're not necessarily needing to be connected to the public sewer. For those people who do have flush toilets, absolutely they have to be connected to either the sewer or in my case, I have a macerating toilet and I have it connected to two large tanks that I have serviced by Sandy Can every so often. So they dispense into those tanks, and then kind of like um, you know what I'm trying to say, a porta potty. So I have it set up kind of like a porta potty. So Sandy Can comes out and services those containers. I am considering um, switching out to an incinerating toilet, and I think that is what I'm getting ready to do. And so at the incinerating toilet, you don't have to deal with any of that because it's handled. For the gray water, so again, gray water does not include feces. It can include urine. It is it would be it can include urine, but most of the times when you're talking about gray water, you're talking about the water from your shower, water from your bathroom sink, and water from your kitchen sink. And it also means that you're paying attention to the products that you're putting down those drains. And a French water drain is what is recommended for those options. Um, there is uh, there's a book. I can't think of the name of it right now that talks about waste. I'll think of the name of the book and I'll put it in the description. That might be helpful in that process. Elsie, how do you receive mail? Do you have an address where the postman delivers it, or do you have a PO box? So I have always, so I the location where I am now, and for the last couple of locations, there's been a physical address, so I could receive mail there if I wanted to. I always like to keep my mail separate and protected from separate from other people's property since this isn't my property. So I have a box at the UPS store since PO boxes you can't receive packages. Well, some companies won't deliver to PO boxes, I should say. So yes, I get my mail at a UPS store so that I can have a physical address, and I have used that address for things like loans, financing a vehicle, and it has worked fine. All right. LaShawn is asking, do I own my land? I've shared that I am on a friend's property. You'll want to refer to episode 3 of the What's Your Question of where can I place a tiny house as I talk about owning land in tiny houses, etc. So I don't own this land. How can we take your class? I will include that information will be in the description. So how to participate will be there. Thank you for that question. Somebody is saying, awesome, they caught alive. Good job. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Somebody says they like my lipstick. I appreciate y'all this morning. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see. Let me see if I see any more questions. I appreciate all of y'all who are excited about catching a live this morning. I'm excited that you caught one too. Thank you for being here this morning. Yes, Rich, it is the humanoir book. Thank you very much for being here and answering that question. That is the book that I was referencing. It talks about waste and composting and all of that stuff, and it's a very good resource. So I will provide a link to the book in the description. I love when the audience comes through with some questions when I can't think of something. So thank you. Um, Thank you, Kathy. I don't know if I addressed you. Thank you so much. LaShawn says she loves my home. It is stylish and my closet is the bomb. Thank you. That was one of my main key pieces in my design, and I love my closet as well. Um, you're very welcome, Elsie. Thank you so much. Your journey has influenced me to consider a smaller space. Thank you so much. That is why I do, part of the reason of why I do what I do. I really want us to understand that, and I think the pandemic and quarantine may have reset some of the mindsets of understanding what you really need in life and what your priorities are. And for me, I realized that a long time ago that it wasn't stuff and things. I want to have the flexibility to live a lighter lifestyle. I really want to be able to travel. And I don't travel with my house as some people travel with their tiny houses, but the lifestyle affords me the opportunity to travel more. And so that is one of the reasons I share my journey. All right, it looks like I'm going to go back through. Looks like I answered the questions that I see in the chat. Um, I don't see any more. It is 12:30, and as I shared, I have a 1 o'clock training that I am attending. Um, Thank you, Rich. 1 o'clock training that I am attending, so I needed to cut this short. Rich is recommending that book as well. He shares that he has a composting toilet, and the book was a huge help. When I started out my journey, I wasn't in the mindset for a composting toilet, even though I had purchased one. I had purchased one that one of my counterparts has, and it had it was the toilet was the part was inside the house, and then it had a unit that went up underneath the house. But because my trailer, the person that used that had a different style trailer from me, and there wasn't enough space under my house for that second part, that unit that needed to fit up underneath it. So from there, I went into the toilet that I have. I just, this was 7 years ago, and I wasn't in the compost. The journey will change you over time, and so likely I could do a composting toilet now. Like I said, I'm considering switching out, and I most likely will switch out to an incinerating toilet. But it is a process where you're learning along the way, and you're changing, and that is one of the things that I love about my tiny house. And my one of my hashtags is tiny house remix, because it helps you grow. It also helps you learn, and there are things that you can switch up and remix along the way as you decide that you might want to do some things differently. Thank you all very much for joining this morning or this afternoon. I keep getting myself all twisted up. It is morning in some spaces and afternoon here. I again thank you all very much for joining. This is the What's Your Question portion of the Creating Home Tiny House series. Again, I alternate content on Sundays at 12 p. Eastern. So next Sunday will be a conversation on an intimate space as someone shares their journey in and around the tiny house movement. And then the alternating Sunday would be the What's Your Question, and I'll be back on some topic as I get back to answering questions. I thank you all very much. If you haven't already, if you found that this video was helpful, and I've seen some of you say that it was, I appreciate that. Please share this content, share my content with others. Um, Actually, be sure that you subscribe to the my channel, and also select the notifications so that you are aware as I am going live. And I again thank you all very much with for joining this morning and for your participation. It's always nice to have some participation, and to see that people are finding the content valuable. And I appreciate you all. And so hey, Magnolia Emporium, I sent you a note. I've been missing you. I'm glad to see you. I need to connect. I've been wondering where you were. So thank you for catching up this morning. I hate that we didn't have time to connect, but maybe you'll respond to my message on Instagram. Thank you all so much. Have a great Sunday afternoon. A beautiful Sunday. I hope here. I hope it is it where you are too. And thank you again for joining the What's Your Question portion of this content. Take care.